What's up, Vikings Nation? Hold on to your horns, cause what I'm about to drop on you today is going to shake you to your core. We're talking about seismic shifts happening right now in Minneapolis that could completely reshape how the season plays out. And I'm not talking about some minor roster moves or typical preseason noise. No. This is the kind of chaos that makes general managers lose sleep and fans question everything they thought they knew about their team. Picture this, a front office in full-blown panic mode, desperately making phone calls across the league like they're trying to put out a 5-alarm fire. Imagine veteran receivers sitting by their phones waiting for that life-changing call that could send them to the frozen tundra of Minnesota. Visual as a former Viking who disappeared from the NFL landscape suddenly resurfaces in the most unexpected place, wearing the colors of a potential playoff opponent. But here's what's really gonna blow your mind. The domino effect of injuries and suspensions has created a perfect storm that nobody saw coming. We're talking about a chain reaction so dramatic that it's forcing the organization to explore every possible avenue, from aging superstars to cast-offs from other teams. The desperation is real, the clock is ticking, and the moves being discussed right now could either save this season or create chaos that lasts for years. Before I reveal the names that will have you jumping out of your seats, do me a favor, smash that like button if you're ready for some Vikings chaos. Drop a comment telling me which move you think would be the biggest game changer, and buckle up because we're about to dive into the most insane 48 hours in recent Vikings history. Are you ready to find out just how desperate things have gotten in Minneapolis? Because what I'm about to tell you first will explain exactly why this organization is in full crisis mode right now. The situation is worse than anyone imagined, and it's happening at the absolute worst possible time. If you thought preseason was supposed to be about fine-tuning and building chemistry, then you clearly haven't been paying attention to what's happening in Vikings headquarters right now, because this organization is currently in full-blown crisis mode, and the moves they're considering could completely alter the trajectory of this entire season. We're talking about a level of desperation that you rarely see from NFL organizations. The kind of panic that makes general managers throw caution to the wind and start making phone calls that could either save their season or destroy their future. Here's the reality that's keeping Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah awake at night. The Minnesota Vikings are slowly but surely running out of wide receivers, and it's happening at the worst possible time imaginable. When Jordan Addison got slapped with that 3-game suspension for violating the league's substance abuse policy, it was like watching the first domino fall in what's become an absolute catastrophe at the position. But that was just the beginning of this nightmare scenario that's unfolding before our eyes. Then came the devastating news about Rondale Moore, who had to be placed on season-ending injured reserve with what's being described as a significant knee injury. Just like that, another weapon was ripped away from JJ McCarthy's arsenal before the season even started. But wait, it gets even worse. Jalen Naylor, who was supposed to step up and fill some of that void, suffered a hand injury last week, and the organization has been mysteriously tight-lipped about the severity and timeline for his return. Do you see what's happening here? This isn't just bad luck. This is a perfect storm of chaos that's threatening to derail everything the Vikings have been building toward. And when Tom Pelissero of NFL Network reports that Minnesota is seriously exploring veteran receivers in the trade market, you know we've moved past the speculation phase and into active crisis management mode. Let me break down just how dire this situation has become. If Naylor joins Addison and Moore on the sidelines, the Vikings will be starting the season with Justin Jefferson and one of Lucky Jackson, Ty Felton, or Jashawn Jones as their receiving corps. Think about that for a second. Justin Jefferson, who's arguably the best receiver in the entire league, would be catching passes alongside guys who have never caught a single pass in the NFL. Can you imagine asking JJ McCarthy, in his very first career start, to orchestrate an offense with that kind of inexperience surrounding his superstar? It's like asking a rookie pilot to land a plane in a thunderstorm with a crew that's never been in the cockpit before. The margin for error becomes so thin that it's practically non-existent. The urgency is real and it's palpable. Pelissero made it crystal clear that while no trade is imminent, Minnesota is actively looking with just 6 days until cutdown day. That's Tuesday, August 26th, when every team in the league has to trim their roster to exactly 53 players. This creates a unique opportunity for teams like the Vikings to swoop in and acquire players who might otherwise hit the waiver wire. But here's what makes this situation even more intriguing. Adolfo Mensa has never been afraid to pull the trigger on trades. Remember TJ Hawkinson, Joshua Dobbs, Cam Akers, Cam Robinson. This general manager has shown time and time again that he's willing to give up draft capital to improve his team, especially when the need is as glaring as it is right now. The strategy is actually quite brilliant when you think about it. Instead of fighting for scraps in the free agent market, where pickings are slim and prices are inflated, the Vikings can target players who are about to be cut anyway. Trading a late round pick to secure the rights to a player who is going to be available for free is smart business for both teams involved. So what exactly are they willing to do to fix this mess? Well, you're about to find out. And the first move involves a familiar face who just made a shocking decision that has everyone talking. Sometimes the NFL has a twisted sense of humor, and what just happened with a former Vikings player is exactly the kind of cosmic joke that makes you question everything you thought you knew about second chances and perfect timing. Picture a player who was once considered a diamond in the rough for Minnesota, a 7th round pick who showed flashes of brilliance before injuries derailed his dreams. Now imagine that same player suddenly emerging from the football wilderness to sign with a team that could potentially face the Vikings in just a few weeks. Kenny Willicks has officially signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the timing of this move is so perfectly dramatic that it feels like it was written by a Hollywood screenwriter. This is the same Kenny Willicks who wore purple and gold just a few years ago, the same guy who managed to record 5 sacks and 7 quarterback hits in limited action during the 2021 season. But here's where the story gets really interesting. His journey from Vikings 7th rounder to Steelers signee is filled with more twists than a psychological thriller. Back in 2020, when the Vikings selected Willicks with the 225th overall pick, there was genuine excitement about his potential. Standing at 6'3" and weighing 264 pounds, he had the size and motor that defensive coordinators dream about. During that 2021 season, he logged 202 defensive snaps and showed the kind of relentless effort that makes coaching staffs take notice. 9 quarterback pressures, 18 total tackles, and those 2.5 sacks painted a picture of a player who could develop into something special. But then came the injury bug, and it hit Willicks like a freight train carrying nothing but bad luck. Season after season, there was always something wrong. A nagging injury here, a setback there, until eventually the Vikings had to make the difficult decision to move on. It's the kind of story that breaks your heart because you could see the talent, you could see the desire, but the body just wouldn't cooperate with the mind's ambitions. What makes this signing even more fascinating is the brutal reality of the timing. The Steelers aren't bringing in Willicks because they suddenly discovered hidden tape of him dominating offensive lines. No, this is what we call an assassin for hire move, where teams bring in bodies during the final week of preseason to absorb hits and keep their projected roster players healthy. It's brutal, it's calculated, and it happens every single August across the league. But here's where Kenny Willicks gets his shot at redemption. He's now 28 years old, supposedly healthy after his time with the Michigan Panthers in the USFL-UFL. And hungrier than ever to prove that those injury-plagued years in Minnesota were just a temporary setback. Do you think he's going to waste this opportunity? Do you think he's not going to give everything he has to show the Steelers that he belongs on an NFL roster? The most delicious part of this entire saga? If Willicks somehow manages to make Pittsburgh's final roster, he'll be suiting up against his former team in Week 4, when the Vikings travel to Dublin for that international game. Can you imagine the storylines? The former Viking who couldn't stay healthy suddenly terrorizing the quarterback he used to protect in practice. It's the kind of narrative that makes the NFL absolutely magical and heartbreaking at the same time. Right now, Willicks is fighting for his football life, trying to prove that he can be a reliable depth option and a special teams contributor. The irony is palpable. While the Vikings are scrambling to find receivers, one of their former defensive players is trying to earn a spot with a team they'll face in just a few weeks. But speaking of the Vikings receiver search, while they're watching former players find new homes, they're also exploring some fascinating options in free agency that could provide immediate relief. While the Vikings are aggressively working the phones trying to orchestrate trades, there's another avenue they're exploring that could provide immediate relief without giving up precious draft capital. And some of the names being floated around are absolutely fascinating. We're talking about proven veterans who are sitting at home right now waiting for their phones to ring, players who could walk into Minneapolis tomorrow and immediately upgrade a receiving core that's been decimated by injuries and suspensions. The free agent market in late August is typically a wasteland of has-beens and never-weres, but this year is different. There are legitimate playmakers available who could slide right into Kevin O'Connell's offense and give J.J. McCarthy the kind of veteran presence he desperately needs during his rookie campaign. And the best part? No trade compensation required, just cold hard cash and roster spots. Let's start with the most intriguing name on the board, Amari Cooper. Hell, just 2 years ago, this guy was putting up elite numbers and flying under the radar as one of the most underrated receivers in the entire league. Yes, he seemed to lose a step during his half-season stint with the Buffalo Bills. But we're talking about a 31-year-old with 7 1,000-yard seasons under his belt. 7! This isn't some unproven commodity. This is a route-running master who can use his big frame to overpower defensive backs and create separation when it matters most. Think about what Cooper brings to the table. Elite route running, reliable hands, red zone presence, and the kind of veteran leadership that young quarterbacks crave. Sure, he might not be the burner he once was, but at this point, the Vikings aren't looking for someone to replace Justin Jefferson. They need someone who can be a legitimate number 2 option and take pressure off their superstar. But Cooper isn't the only intriguing option sitting in free agency right now. Tyler Boyd is another name that should have Vikings fans salivating with anticipation. This guy followed his former offensive coordinator Brian Callahan to Tennessee, expecting to finally get his shot as a featured receiver after years of playing behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in Cincinnati. Instead, he got caught up in the Titans quarterback carousel and managed just 39 catches for 390 yards and 0 touchdowns. Here's what makes Boyd so appealing. He never had fewer than 600 receiving yards in a full season when he had competent quarterback play, including 2 separate 1,000-yard campaigns. The talent is still there, the hands are still reliable, and he's proven he can produce when given the opportunity. Plus, he's familiar with working in complex offensive systems and could pick up O'Connell's scheme relatively quickly. The third name that keeps popping up in conversations is Gabe Davis, who was shockingly cut by the Jacksonville Jaguars after just 1 year of a 3-year contract. Davis finished his lone season in Jacksonville with 20 receptions for 239 yards and 2 touchdowns, numbers that don't tell the whole story of his capabilities. He's a proven veteran who excels on the outside. Exactly the kind of big play threat that could complement Jefferson perfectly. What makes Davis even more interesting is that he's already drawing interest from contenders like the Pittsburgh Steelers and Buffalo Bills. If those teams see value in him, shouldn't the Vikings at least kick the tires? He's got the size to win contested catches, the speed to stretch the field vertically, and the experience to handle pressure situations that come with playing meaningful games. But here's the million-dollar question. Are any of these veterans actually interested in coming to Minnesota? The Vikings can offer immediate playing time and the chance to be the number 2 receiver behind one of the best players in the league. They can offer a young, developing quarterback who's going to be looking for reliable targets and an offensive coordinator who's proven he can maximize receiver production. The clock is ticking, and every day these players remain unsigned is another day closer to the season, starting with Lucky Jackson or Ty Felton lining up across from Justin Jefferson. Do you think that's acceptable for a team with playoff aspirations? Because if these free agents don't work out, the Vikings have some other interesting options they're exploring. If you thought the free agent possibilities were intriguing, then you're about to have your mind completely blown by the sheer scope of what the Vikings are actually considering right now in the trade market. Because we're not just talking about 1 or 2 potential moves. We're talking about a comprehensive evaluation of the entire league's receiver market that includes 9 different players who could potentially end up in purple and gold before cut-down day arrives. The most fascinating aspect of this entire situation is how it perfectly illustrates the chess match that happens every August across the NFL. Teams like Minnesota, who find themselves in desperate need, are circling like vultures around organizations that have too much depth at the position. It's a buyer's market for the Vikings, but only if they're willing to act quickly and decisively before other teams swoop in and steal their targets. One name that keeps generating buzz is Trey Palmer from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and his situation perfectly encapsulates how quickly circumstances can change in the NFL. Palmer was initially viewed as a logical trade candidate, a speedy receiver with return skills who seemed expendable in Tampa Bay's crowded receiving room. But then Jalen McMillan suffered a neck injury that's going to cost him significant time, and suddenly Palmer's value to the Buccaneers skyrocketed overnight. This is exactly the kind of curveball that makes August so unpredictable. One injury can completely reshape a team's priorities and turn a player who was available into someone who's now considered untouchable. Without Palmer, Tampa Bay would be starting the season with Chris Godwin on the non-waivable list, setting up a top three of Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka, and Tez Johnson. That's not exactly the depth they envisioned heading into the season. But Palmer represents just one piece of a much larger puzzle that the Vikings are trying to solve. The beauty of their current situation, if you can call a receiver crisis beautiful, is the timing. With 6 days until cutdown day, every team in the league is going to be forced to make difficult decisions about players they prefer to keep but simply don't have roster space for. Think about the New England Patriots, who the Vikings just finished practicing with during joint sessions. New England completely revamped their receiving room this offseason, adding multiple players who seem to have secured their roster spots. That depth could work in Minnesota's favor, as someone like Kendrick Bourne might become expendable despite his proven production over the past 2 seasons. Bourne represents exactly the kind of reliable veteran the Vikings need. Someone who secured roughly 700 yards and 5 touchdowns over his last 20 games. A player who knows how to get open and make clutch catches when the game is on the line. He's not going to wow you with spectacular athleticism, but he's the kind of steady presence that young quarterbacks learn to trust and rely upon. The Buffalo Bills present another intriguing possibility, with players like Curtis Samuel potentially becoming available. Samuel brings versatility that could be incredibly valuable in O'Connell's system, the ability to line up in multiple positions and create mismatches that opposing defenses struggle to account for. He's experienced, he's productive, and he's exactly the type of player who could step in immediately and contribute at a high level. What makes this entire situation so compelling is the domino effect that's about to happen across the league. When teams start making their final cuts, it's going to create a feeding frenzy among organizations like the Vikings, who have clear needs and available resources. The key is being prepared to act quickly when opportunities present themselves, and having the courage to pull the trigger when the right deal materializes. But here's what's really got me excited about this situation. Adolfo Mensah has shown repeatedly that he's not afraid to be aggressive when he identifies players who can help his team. Whether it's trading for established veterans at the deadline or making moves during roster cutdowns, he's proven he'll take calculated risks to improve the roster. However, all of these moves we've discussed so far pale in comparison to the nuclear option that's reportedly being discussed in Vikings headquarters right now. We're talking about a potential blockbuster that would send shockwaves throughout the entire NFC and transform this offense overnight. Now we're getting into the realm of blockbuster possibilities that could completely change the landscape of the NFC. Because if the Vikings really want to make a splash and address their receiver crisis with a move that would send shockwaves throughout the entire league, there's one name that keeps surfacing in trade discussions that would absolutely transform their offense overnight. But fair warning, this potential acquisition comes with complications that could make even the most aggressive general managers think twice before pulling the trigger. Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders is exactly the kind of elite talent that could turn the Vikings from a team scrambling for receivers into a legitimate Super Bowl contender. But the financial reality of making this deal happen is absolutely staggering. We're talking about a 30-year-old receiver who's entering the final year of his contract with a cap hit of $25.5 million. And according to reports from The Athletic, he's seeking a new deal worth more than the $33 million annually that DK Metcalf just secured from the Seahawks. Let that sink in for a moment. McLaurin wants to become one of the highest paid receivers in NFL history, and he's got the resume to justify those demands. This isn't some receiver banking on potential. This is a proven game changer who's been putting up elite numbers despite playing with questionable quarterback situations throughout his career. Can you imagine what he could do catching passes from J.J. McCarthy in an offense designed by Kevin O'Connell? But here's where reality comes crashing down like a freight train loaded with salary cap consequences. The Vikings are already paying Justin Jefferson a fortune, and they're going to have to extend Jordan Addison's contract sooner rather than later. Adding McLaurin's massive salary demands to that mix would create a financial situation that could handicap their ability to build a complete roster around their young quarterback for years to come. The numbers are absolutely mind-boggling when you break them down. Jefferson is already one of the highest paid receivers in the league. Addison is going to command significant money when his rookie deal expires. And now you'd be adding a third receiver making elite money. That's a level of investment at one position that could force the organization to make painful cuts elsewhere on the roster, potentially compromising their ability to build a championship caliber defense or maintain depth along the offensive line. Yet despite these financial concerns, you can't ignore what McLaurin would bring to this offense. He's a legitimate number one receiver who could take pressure off Jefferson by commanding double coverage on the opposite side of the field. He's proven he can produce regardless of who's throwing him the ball, which would be invaluable for McCarthy during his development phase. And he's still in his prime at 30 years old, meaning this wouldn't be a short-term rental. It would be a multi-year partnership that could define this era of Vikings football. The contractual impasse in Washington actually works in Minnesota's favor from a trade perspective. When a player is holding out for more money and the team is reluctant to pay, it creates leverage for potential trade partners. The Commanders might prefer to get something in return rather than risk losing McLaurin for nothing if he decides to play hardball with his contract demands. From the Vikings' perspective, acquiring McLaurin would be the kind of aggressive move that signals they believe this is their window to compete for a championship. It would show J.J. McCarthy that their organization is committed to surrounding him with elite talent from day one. And it would give the offense a legitimate threat that opposing defenses would have to account for on every single snap. The question becomes, is Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah willing to make a deal that could impact the team's salary cap for years to come? Is he prepared to mortgage future flexibility for immediate impact? And perhaps most importantly, can the Vikings even structure a deal that would satisfy both McLaurin's contract demands and Washington's trade requirements? This is the kind of move that could define an entire regime, the type of calculated gamble that either looks like genius or complete incompetence depending on how it plays out. The next 48 hours are going to be absolutely crucial for this organization, and Vikings fans better buckle up because this wild ride is just getting started. Make sure you're subscribed and notifications are turned on, because when these moves start happening, they're going to happen fast, and you're not going to want to miss what comes next in this absolutely insane saga.